souls.
All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church, building community, inspiring growth, creating change. Here in the heart of Kansas City, we come together to create this hour of shared reflection so that we might be renewed in courage for these times and inspired to lives of greater dignity, higher purpose, deeper generosity, and more effective action. May the words and music and images that we offer today nourish our best selves, calling forth abundant wisdom and love, a love that has the power to overcome both loneliness in the heart and oppression in the world. Welcome to our service.
Arise, O souls,
Hey! Okay, aha, this time. Although the program says Don Dickey is the moderator, I'm Jean Patterson. And I'm glad to be with you this morning. Okay, how many of you have voted? Wonderful. How many of you are ready for the commercials to be over with? Well, we promise a commercial-free service this morning. Whether you're here in the room or watching online, we're glad you're here. Your presence enriches all of us and our time together. We are a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Our tradition is a large tent with room for many beliefs and approaches to the questions that matter. That said, our values of inclusion, compassion, and justice are strong, and they hold us together. We seek to build the beloved community, making room for everyone and creating a world where everyone's needs are met. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. Whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears, you are welcome here. You're invited to join us with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. We welcome you today. You may be new here this morning. Welcome to you, particularly. If you've not stopped by the welcome table in the lobby, please do so and learn more about becoming involved with the church.
Am I okay? Good morning, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed either your extra hour of sleep or your extra hour of conversation and fellowship with the other early birds here today. We come together not only on the cusp of daylight savings time, but in the liminal moment of democracy, a presidential election which will determine much about the governing leadership we will experience in the coming 4 years. At such a time, it is fitting that we turn our attention to our communities of memory and promise, seeking the guidance of our covenant promises, the consolations of common commitment to shared ideals which transcend the dangers and urgencies of the present moment. Thus, it seems to me appropriate to recall the aspirations of some of our spiritual leaders among the first generation of Unitarian Universalist ministers following the consolidation of the two denominations, each of which once helped to formulate the practices that made a democratic nation possible for 2 memorable centuries of human history. The Reverend Napoleon Lovely and the great poet of humanism, Reverend Kenneth Patton, wrote, "Though our knowledge is incomplete, our truth partial, and our love imperfect, let us believe that new light is ever waiting to break through individual hearts and minds to illuminate the ways of humanity, that there is mutual strength in willing cooperation, and that it is the bonds of love that hold open the gates of freedom. Remember, O beloved, ours has been yesterday, and ours will be today and tomorrow. Ours is the world, the universe, and life itself, if we will make it ours by the largeness and strength of our love. Ours is the commonwealth of humanity, now and tomorrow, building and yet to be builded. And what then is required of us? This we know, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly upon the earth." Here today, in this temple to the source of goodness that dwells within ourselves, and to the source of the good that surrounds and summons us, we would be renewed by our commitment to the disciplines of light, by which, if it is to endure, democracy must be sustained as a personal ideal and a collective practice. May the light of this chalice flame guide our journey, so that we turn not aside into paths of greed, of vainglory, of cruelty or indolence or ignorance, but boldly assert the duties and values of citizenship incumbent upon all who would avail themselves of life, liberty, and happiness in a free society. If we have sought profit or privilege out of the suffering of others, may we find ourselves rebuked by the better angels of our natures, and repent of such unrighteous seeking, which cannot establish right relationships nor serve to build beloved community. If we have spoken or behaved resentfully of the inconvenient duties of justice, mercy, and humility, may all the good we would not love return to break our hearts until we are more fit to inhabit the world as we long for it to be. Let us turn back from the habits of selfishness and forswear the foolish ways that lead so near, so often, to disaster, so that we might come to know an earth that is indeed fair, with all her people one. Let us arise together and speak once more our covenant promise to one another, and then remain standing for our opening hymn. Together we affirm goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to speak the truth in love, and to help one another. in fellowship means that we are called upon to be glad with those who rejoice and to weep with those who mourn. Thus we set aside this time in our gathering to share with one another the joys and concerns which are now shaping our lives. May the beauty and sweetness of these brief flowers remind us to hold one another in the bonds of sympathy, encouragement, and care. And I will remind you that if you have a joy or concern that you would like to share only with the people in this room, we will have a moment at the end of this part of the service when the cameras will not be on the front up here and the microphones will be not broadcasting. So if you want to wait, I'll let you know when that happens. I want to begin with a flower for the turtles out in Lake Wildwood, who we've been counting every day, and as we drove past the mud flat this morning, there were no turtles out, so I think it's getting a little cold for them, and they're getting ready to go into hibernation for the winter. So I will look forward to seeing them again in the spring.
This is for my mom's companion, Doug Payne, who passed away Friday night. Passed very quickly in my mom's arms, as we all should do.
Are there other joys or concerns to be shared?
I'll give a quick joy. My daughter Louise turned 18 at the end of September, and so she got to vote for the first time yesterday. And
Yay, Louise!
And the line at the church at 79th and Paseo was long and super just excited. It was a really nice community experience.
Excellent. Hi, Judy.
Did you have a joy? You want to share it? In our seats, Jude said that his joy is his little sister Bridget, and he can't wait to see her grow up.
Yeah. Take a flower and put it in the vase, okay? Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one, yeah. We're good. Hey, Richard.
I just have one concern. My father hurt his back, and he's been in a ton of pain,
Oh, no.
mostly staying in bed. The fortunate thing is he's getting care, so hopefully things will be better soon.
I have both a joy and a concern. I'll start with the concern. My nephew was recently diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer.
Oh, no.
And anyway, he's doing okay so far. But my joy is when I'm an election judge, and when we did our training on Wednesday, they thought that this election will have a 75 to 80% turnout.
Wow. Yay.
My joy is that my dog Tater Tot is getting better. His skin got all bumpy, and he wasn't feeling good. So it makes me happy to see him get better.
Yep. That's good. You want to take the flower and put it in the vase? Yeah.
I have a combination joy sorrow. I finally found the strength to quit a job that was causing me intense
emotional distress on the daily. However, it is also now causing me a little bit of financial distress, but the inner peace is much better than the financial concerns. So,
Yeah. Congratulations.
Last month, I bought my first car, which was very scary, but it's been really exciting. It's 20 years newer than my old car, so I feel a lot safer on the road, and also just very fortunate to be in a position where I was able to get that done and afford to have that all handled. So it's really exciting, really scary.
Congratulations, that's great.
And this is just a recognition and a joy that everybody in our little familial circle is doing pretty good. You know, pretty good is pretty good.
That's wonderful.
We're really excited. We're pregnant with twins.
All right.
So, feeling really excited. They're due April 15th, but the induction date is hopefully March 30th. So,
All right.
if they don't run in our family, it kind of just happened. So, if anybody knows anything about raising twins, come find us.
That's going to be 2 quilts, people, so watch your newsletter.
this is kind of a funny follow-up. We're really excited that our teenage level of our whole life sexual education training culminates in this month, and they've been a really great group, and really the joy of it is seeing 3 churches in our area come together to make it happen for all of those teens. We work with Shawnee Mission Union Church and Colonial UCC, and yeah, I think we have 2 more weeks to go, so it's exciting.
And can I get the tech deck to turn the cameras away, and those of you who would prefer to make a or any other. I think we can have the cameras back. And I will place this final flower for all the outreachings of the Spirit that abide unspoken in our hearts. And let us bless our children with song as they depart to their classes, and then we will join together in the congregational response.
Take to follow.
response to our sharing. Though our knowledge is incomplete, our truth partial, and our love imperfect, let us believe that new light is ever waiting to break through individual hearts and minds to illuminate the ways of humanity, that there is mutual strength in willing cooperation, and that it is bonds of love that hold open the gates of freedom. Remember, O beloved, ours has been yesterday, and ours will be today and tomorrow. Ours is the world, the universe, and life itself, if we will make it ours by the largeness and strength of our love. Ours is the commonwealth of humanity, now and tomorrow, building and yet to be builded. And what is required of us, this we know, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly on the earth.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Bill Rainey, a member of All Souls Board and the choir. On the cusp of our national election, I want to speak to you about hope and vision and ask for your support through a contribution today to All Souls. My wife, Suzanne, and I have been members of All Souls since 2006, and we attended occasionally before that with her dad, Dick King, who was also a member here. At this very podium, 26 years, 1 month, and 28 days ago, we were married. I cried my eyes out. Not today, though, no crying.
You promise?
We would always joke that any person mentioned in a sermon would turn out to be a Unitarian Universalist. Today I want to tell you about Thomas Lamb Eliot. Slide 1, please. Thomas Lamb Eliot was a Unitarian. All right, David, do the honors. There's a prize. Note for future Bill Rainey speeches, I am not above bribes to encourage audience participation. In 1867, Eliot accepted the call to be minister of the First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon, then a frontier town of 7,000. In the next half century, he transformed the city by force of will, becoming who one historian called the most influential individual who lived in Portland, bar none. Some of his accomplishments included founding the Oregon Humane Society after witnessing a horse being whipped in the street. He pushed for reform of the deplorable conditions at the county jail and mental hospital. Did I mention he was a Unitarian? But one thing he did was not for the people then living in Portland or even their children, a thing of vision and hope. Eliot cultivated a relationship with Simeon Reed, a shipping baron. When Reed and his wife died, they left their estate to found an institution of learning in Portland. Eliot envisioned the gift should fund a school to rival the finest colleges of the East Coast, quote, an inspiration to the body politic. The poorest person shall have an equal opportunity with the richest to gain the very best education, leadership, and realization of their best person. In 1911, Reed College was founded. Here is Eliot Hall, subsequently the site of many student sit-ins and avant-garde performance art pieces. Slide 2. In 2023, more than a century later, a young woman who grew up right here at All Souls enrolled as a first-year student at Reed. Slide 3, please. There, she was challenged intellectually, but more importantly, welcomed and loved by her peers, who embraced our daughter, Aoife Rainey, with friendship and gave her father hope in a time of vile threats against people for nothing more than their gender, that there are communities where everyone is welcome. Truly, quote, an inspiration to the body politic. This is what Reverend Eliot did with Reed, and this is what we do here at All Souls. So my request today, my beloved community, is to give generously, not to support our church today or tomorrow, but to foster hope and vision like Reverend Eliot 100 years ago. through the tradition of Unitarian Universalism for decades and centuries to come. The offering will now be taken.
I am ever hopeful, ever
Please join me as we dedicate our offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
Roughly, am I speaking in this mic? Okay. Roughly 20 years ago, in late August 2024, Newsweek magazine reported that the then Attorney General John Ashcroft was undertaking a national publicity tour in support of the Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001, which came to be known popularly as the USA Patriot Act. This was a federal law enacted after the September 11th, 2001 attacks. The Patriot Act was designed to enhance law enforcement powers to prevent and prosecute terrorism by expanding secret surveillance abilities. In addition, it was to help facilitate interagency communication and increase penalties for terrorism-related crimes. Despite the alacrity with which it was passed by a large bipartisan majority in Congress immediately following the attacks, the Patriot Act came to be much criticized for potential privacy violations due to its broad surveillance provisions. As Michael Isikoff and Daniel Claydom reported, quote, alarmed that the Anti-Patriot Act movement was spiraling and might torpedo internal Justice Department plans for even more expansive anti-terrorism proposals, Ashcroft aides concluded they needed to strike back. The anxiety at DOJ was intensified by the fact that the Anti-Patriot Act campaign was being driven by a coalition that included such diverse groups as the ACLU and Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum. The House sponsor of the anti-sneak and peek amendment, for example, was GOP Representative Butch Otter, an Idaho conservative, who told Newsweek his concerns were heightened when anti-abortion groups warned that abortion protesters could be targeted as domestic terrorists. Justice officials said Otter and his supporters were grotesquely distorting what the law does, and that federal judges must still approve any secret searches conducted by federal agents. Ashcroft aides insisted that they could just get their message out. They were confident they would prevail and touted recent poll numbers showing 55% of the public still backed the act. As one aide put it, after you get past the interest groups, quote, the rest of the country is just saying, keep us safe.
This mentality is challenged in an editorial essay by Arab-American lawyer Randall Hamoud, who writes, in the months since 9/11/2001, I have received countless threats accusing me of being a terrorist. Nothing could be further from the truth. I was born in Los Angeles to Lebanese American parents. They taught me to go to school and make something of myself. I graduated from UCLA Law School and started a private practice. I speak Spanish, not Arabic. because if you do business in Southern California, knowing Spanish is a good idea. I own a quarter horse, love football, and am a member of the National Rifle Association. I am a mainstream American. I'm also a secularized Muslim. While I was growing up, my family attended the local mosque once a week. Back then, Islam in America was westernized. The imam did not wear a beard. Men and women weren't segregated except during prayers, and the services were in English. Today, Islam in America is much more fundamentalist. Services are conducted in Arabic. Men and women are completely segregated. I attend mosque only on special holidays, so most local Muslims know I am not a devout practitioner of Islam. They didn't trust me at first, but that changed when they saw me vehemently defending my clients in court and protesting the government's treatment of Arabs and Muslims in the media. Even so, I did not join the fight to protect my own kind. I simply believed that the rule of law was the first victim of the war on terror. For example, a material witness can be arrested only if he or she is not cooperating with the government. My first 3 9/11 clients had been fully cooperating, but investigators claimed they were not in order to arrest them and spirit them away from LA to New York. In April 2002, the federal district court judge in New York ruled the material witness statute could not be used to arrest grand jury witnesses. She released one of my clients and declared that the testimony of 4 FBI agents was not credible and misleading. My clients were lucky. Many of those who remain in custody months or even years later never saw a courtroom. The government arrested Jose Padilla, an American citizen, in Chicago, labeled him an enemy combatant, and contended that he could be held in military prison indefinitely without access to an attorney. Since when does the Constitution allow citizens arrested on U.S. soil to be held beyond the reach of the courts? The Bush administration played fast and loose with our rights. We barely began to understand the full impact of the Patriot Act on our civil liberties when it was shoved through Congress in the aftermath of 9/11. Federal agents could now search your home or office without your knowledge and force your bank, your doctor, or even your library to turn over their records about you. Are Americans willing to sacrifice their freedoms in order to combat terrorism? I hope not. As Ben Franklin said, those who would trade liberty for security deserve neither. I am not fighting for Arabs or Muslims. I am fighting for all of us.
when the feminist activist Matilda Joslyn Gage died in 1898, 22 years before the first presidential election in which women would nationally have the right to cast their own votes. She was estranged from the two women who had been her friends and partners in the struggle for women's rights for nearly half a century. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are remembered today as iconic figures in the quest for the right to vote for women. And let us bear in mind from time to time that it was only 8 years ago that we celebrated even 1 century of that right. But for most of their active decades in the campaign for women's suffrage, these two had functioned as what they called a triumvirate, together with Matilda Gage. Gage broke away from the National Women's Suffrage Association when it combined with the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the organization which sought to bring about a variety of national reforms, including mandatory school prayer and a constitutional amendment making Christ the head of government, as well as the banning of alcohol consumption, for which it is best remembered. For many of its supporters, women's suffrage was merely an instrumental goal, the expectation being that once women had the right to vote, they could be counted on to vote in favor of these domestic and faith-based initiatives. As other suffragists began to pay lip service to such religious and domestic ideals, then popular in Victorian culture, as exemplified by the poet William Browne, who wrote, "The sweetest sounds to mortals given are heard in mother, home, and heaven." Gage continued to insist that the church was actually one of the most significant institutions perpetuating the oppression of women. Though married and a mother herself, she refused to subordinate her claims of justice for her gender to either the rewards of personal affection or the promises of life hereafter. In a defiant gesture of rebuke to her former comrades, she had engraved on her tombstone the affirmation, "There is a sweeter word than mother, home, or heaven. It is liberty." You go, Matilda. I think of Matilda Gage in these tumultuous, difficult days more than a century after her death. I think of her willingness to oppose the partners of all her adult life's work in the service of an abstract principle, the ideal of freedom. I think of how ready many in our culture seem to be to exchange our fundamental liberty for the promise of security, and how our fears are played upon so that we might hesitate to protest against the nibbling at the edges that will destroy the fabric of freedom that has taken hundreds of years to weave. From the English meadows at Runnymede, where King John's hand was forced by his barons in 1215 to sign the Magna Carta, to the halls of Philadelphia in 1776, to the Bill of Rights, to the chambers of Congress and the benches of the Supreme Court, the object of democracy has been to protect citizens from the arbitrary power of government through the structures of equal protection and equal constraint before the law. Matilda Gage knew that the granting of the vote alone would not make women free, so long as their status before the law was not the same as that of men was allowed to hold. It is that freedom, hard won through struggle and sacrifice by those who believed to the core of their beings that the sweetest word was liberty, that freedom that today has been and is being almost casually disregarded by people like John Ashcroft. The undisputed fact that our government was allowed to hold in military custody in South Carolina a civilian United States citizen who was formally charged with no crime, and to refuse to allow him access to a lawyer ought to scare us more than any envelope of anthrax or suicide bomber. If they can do it to Jose Padilla and get away with it, they can do it to you or me, and make no mistake, they will. John Ashcroft thought that if you objected to the situation, you must be a special interest group and a minority. The rest of the country, according to his aide, is saying, just keep us safe. If he is right, then Matilda Joslyn Gage has a message from her grave for my fellow citizens. There is a sweeter word than safety or homeland security, and that word is liberty. How is it that Americans at the beginning of the 21st century have become so focused on safety, so fearful, and so careless of our rights and freedom? It is impossible not to remember September 11, 2001, and reflect that the destruction of the Twin Towers in New York City's World Trade Center, like the bombing of Pearl Harbor 60 years before, woke our nation out of an illusion of isolated invulnerability. Yet unlike that earlier attack, this enemy was not an identifiable country, but amorphous and intangible, a mindset, an anger, a loosely woven international network of political and religious fanaticism that only increases its appeal as it is attacked. But religious ideology is not the province solely of the Islamic faith, nor of the enemies of the United States. In fact, what I want to suggest this morning is that there is a connection between the visions that drive suicide bombers and hijackers and the images that play in the minds of many of those who want to protect us and keep us safe, and that both of those worldviews stand in opposition to that sweetest word, liberty. Apocalyptic ideology, whatever its flavor, is the enemy of freedom. The impulse to make us safe or to make us saved has the same origin and is the opposite of that which makes us free. Therefore, my friends, if we would wish to carry forward the legacy of Matilda Gage, if in fact our faith teaches that the sweetest word is liberty, it behooves us to understand something about that apocalyptic worldview and how it affects the thinking of those who subscribe to it. Many of us may be most familiar with the apocalyptic style from the final chapter of the Christian scriptures, the book of Revelation, which is perhaps the best known example of this kind of literature, though it is by no means unique. And the format was not original even at the time when it was written long ago. Examples of apocalyptic literature can be found in many traditions, including the book of Daniel in the Hebrew scriptures. The word apocalypse in Greek means something uncovered, literally the removal of a veil, or revealed, hence the title Revelation. But what the genre means is a visionary account of the end of the world, at least as we presently know it, with some kind of cataclysmic struggle and the final permanent triumph of the forces of good over evil. People turn to apocalyptic predictions when the world as they experience it is so confused and corrupt and uncertain that they truly do not know what to expect next. When things are in such a wretched state, it can seem that the only way forward is to chuck the whole mess and start over. And people begin to tell stories of what that might look like. These kinds of stories serve two purposes. One is to denounce those individuals, groups, and forces that are perceived as having brought about the intolerable conditions. An apocalyptic worldview knows with clarity who the enemy is. Second, the story serves to give back to anxious individuals a measure of control over their fate, maybe not during the present moment of chaos, but eventually, according to the story, those who identify with the forces of good will triumph and be rewarded, while all who struggled against them will be defeated and punished. Rather than trying to understand these narratives as either spiritual or moral truths or wisdom, or as a realistic narrative of historical events, it is more helpful to begin by remembering that they originate in, and for thousands of years have spoken to, a culture without movies, television, animation, graphic novels, or color printing. This part of the Bible should be thought of as the equivalent of a science fiction action superhero fantasy, complete with monsters and extravagant special effects. Think of a combination of the movies Star Wars, Alien, and Toy Story. Think of your favorite comic book with a subversive political subtext. You will look in vain for a coherent plot. Just suspend disbelief as you would for a ninja flick or a Roadrunner cartoon, and enjoy the flow of fantastic images, suspense, and relentless action. If you are old enough to remember the Beatles' animated feature-length movie Yellow Submarine, with its succession of colorfully psychedelic images somewhat intentionally reminiscent of a drug-induced hallucination, you will be familiar with the mindset appropriate to experiencing most apocalyptic literature, including the book of Revelation. Apocalyptic literature often employs the technique of allegory and refers to the powers that be in the present world in veiled or symbolic terms. If someone were writing an original apocalypse in our era and included the line, "And there arose in the land a great bush, and the bush menaced the land and bore much evil fruit, but then the bush was cut down and cast into the fire," we would make certain connections, wouldn't we? The book of Revelation in the Christian Bible is full of such veiled references to the government of Rome, but 2,000 years later, we don't necessarily get all of them. Just as someone who wasn't familiar with the sequence of American presidents might wonder what our imagined author had against woody plants. What makes a piece of apocalyptic literature enduring is that its images are both evocative and nonspecific enough that later people in completely different circumstances can discover their own connections to the characters and events described and formulate their own ways of being on the side of the virtue that is to triumph in the long run. This almost always calls them to withdraw their allegiance and commitment from the effort to make existing social, legal, political, and religious systems work, and instead to focus on hastening the confrontation of cosmic powers that is to end the old world and begin the new. Now, this might all be a curiosity of literary history, were it not for the fact that apocalyptic literature is right now enjoying a popularity in American culture that ought to command our attention and indeed our concern. Paul Boyer, a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, describes this process of contemporizing and commercializing the biblical apocalyptic vision very clearly. He writes, "What we see in contemporary American mass culture is that apocalyptic belief has become big business. It's become an industry, a subset of the publishing industry, and books that become successful literally sell millions of copies. What we're seeing is a kind of synergistic process where a popular televangelist will publish a book which is successful, which will then spin off into videotapes and movies and sometimes prophecy magazines. And even we have bumper stickers and wristwatches and other kinds of material, all of which reinforce popular belief and interest in Bible prophecy. For instance, Hal Lindsey is one of the most fascinating figures in the whole history of contemporary prophecy belief. A person of very obscure origins and very little education, in the 1960s, he was a campus preacher out in Southern California. In 1970, he publishes a book, The Late Great Planet Earth, which is really a popularization of earlier evangelist systems. Theologically, there's nothing new there. What he does, though, is to link it to contemporary events, the Cold War, nuclear war, the Chinese Communist threat, the restoration of Israel. All of these events he links to specific biblical passages in the classical fashion of prophecy popularizers. And the book is written in an almost slang-like, very accessible language. It's not a heavy theological book at all. It's a popular book. And this book just took off and became the nonfiction bestseller of the entire decade of the 1970s. And it represented the point at which publishers began to realize there's tremendous potential in prophecy books. So many other writers began to write books in the same popular way that have an enormously broad appeal. The significance of Hal Lindsey, for instance, is that he represents another one of those moments of breakthrough, when interest in Bible prophecy spills out beyond just the ranks of true believers and becomes a broader cultural phenomenon. And people who had never paid much attention to prophecy at all hear about this book. They pick up the paperback and see the way Lindsey weaves together current events and finds biblical passages that seem to foretell those events. And they say, wow, this is amazing. There must really be something to this. Hal Lindsey seems to have had considerable influence not just on part of the public as a whole, but at some of the highest levels of government. He is a somewhat boastful person, and it's not entirely clear how much to trust all his stories. But he does tell of giving seminars at the Pentagon and seminars at the National War College that were crowded, thronged with people. So there does seem to have been, in the 1970s, a considerable interest in prophetic interpretations, particularly as they related to Russia and the Cold War, at some of the highest levels of government. Prophecy believers since the time of the Millerite movement in the 1840s have been extremely skilled at using the latest technologies, and that's been very much true in our own day. It's fascinating to see how this ancient belief system is being spread really worldwide by all those technologies, from mass market books to the internet, World Wide Web, videotapes, even feature-length films. The entire apparatus of modern mass culture is accessible to those who are believers and who wish to spread their message. It's also interesting to see how the prophecy popularizers view modern technology. On the one hand, they see all these systems of mass communication preparing the way for the Antichrist. But in the meantime, they're quite ready to use these same technologies themselves to spread the word of their particular interpretation of Bible prophecy. Again, Hal Lindsey in his book, The Late Great Planet Earth, sort of set the standard for this, because Lindsey proved to be an enormously successful marketer of his product. The Late Great Planet Earth, published initially by an obscure religious publisher in Michigan, is taken up by a mass market publisher and produced in a mass market format that is sold in supermarkets and airports and so on. A film is made of The Late Great Planet Earth, narrated actually by Orson Welles. So it set the pattern of a multimedia phenomenon that we now see with a number of prophecy popularizers today. Another example is the Left Behind series of novels by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins, which tells us some very interesting things about the way prophecy belief is being used today in this post-COVID, post-Cold War period. It's a series of novels which deal in fictional form with premillennial dispensationalist beliefs that are now selling by the millions of copies in modern America. This narrative begins with the rapture. It deals with a small group of so-called tribulation saints that find each other during the period of the Great Tribulation and try to survive the rise of the Antichrist. They're very readable, they're very well written, and they are being marketed in a very powerful and successful way. The publisher has a website. They have produced a children's version of four kids going through the Great Tribulation. It was said at one point that a film version was in the works. So the Left Behind phenomenon is a classic example of the way a very ancient belief system has broken through into the mass market of modern America. For one thing, it deals with contemporary themes, the new communications technologies. The characters in the novels are all using the internet and communicating by email, and so it's very up to the minute in terms of the cultural material that's described. Yet it deals with a sort of fictionalized version of a very ancient traditional system of Bible prophecy interpretation, the rapture, the Great Tribulation, the rise of the Antichrist. The religious themes, the apocalyptic themes of the series are very well known, very well established, but they're combined with these contemporary allusions that gives the series a very up-to-the-minute quality. I think there's inevitably a kind of distortion and trivialization of what, in some sense, is a very profound insight. The apocalyptic worldview is one that speaks to the human condition in very profound ways, in terms of the opposition of the forces of chaos and order, and so on. When it's translated into the world of contemporary mass marketing, contemporary Hollywood film techniques, inevitably, it seems to me, much of the depth, much of the complexity, much of the meaning that it might have for people in terms of encouraging them to really think about the nature of the world that we live in gets lost, and it simply becomes another product to be consumed and forgotten. Our world, in the wake of 9/11 and in the face of enormous global challenges that make isolated security impossible, is certainly a complex and dangerous and confusing place. It is not surprising that the radiant visions and compelling storytelling of the apocalyptic worldview appeal to the popular imagination. I suppose that all of us, even liberals and freethinkers, have a picture of what the world might look like transformed by the values we cherish. Certainly Matilda Joslyn Gage had such a vision for women, but unlike her sister suffragists, she was not willing to trade her commitment to freedom for the realization of that ideal. And that is the challenge for all of us. Certainly we would like to be safe. Certainly we would like to think of ourselves on the side of goodness and virtue and playing for what will ultimately be the winning team. The question is, what is the sweetest word? Is it home and safety? Is it heaven in the form of a new world? Personally, I'm with Matilda. I want safety from the government in the form of my rights, and I don't believe that giving them up will help one bit to protect me from the ideological dreams of fanatics, whatever their religious flavor. So look here, Project 2025, Heritage Foundation and Friends, John Ashcroft and Minions. I do not need the promise of some technicolor new world. I do not expect to be safe, and I do not expect to be saved. There is a sweeter word than home or heaven or mother. It is liberty. Y'all stop encouraging our leaders to pretend to be gods and get them to do their job, which is far more than keeping us safe. It is keeping us free. And I ask your indulgence to join me in our closing hymn. We release this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our minds and hearts, far beyond these four walls, into the wider world until we are together again. Let us take with us into the unpredictability of the world in our days the imperishable wisdom of our elders, Benjamin Franklin, those who will give up a necessary freedom for a little temporary safety deserve neither freedom nor safety and will have neither. You know what you need to do if you have not done it already. Go vote. There is a sweeter word than mother, home, or heaven. It is liberty.